Hello, everyone. You are about to hear a brief retelling of the movie The Mill. Enjoy the movie. Joe, a businessman, wakes up in a weird room with a mill in it and instantly vomits since he has no idea how he got there. His phone is nowhere to be found, the walls are thick, and the sole door is hefty and shut. When he starts shouting for aid, he hears a voice from the air vent instructing him to remain quiet. However, the person quickly sees Joe is unfamiliar and explains a few things. Joe was dosed, and the side effects will make him feel quite depressed for a few days. He also notes that tomorrow would be difficult, but then he says he has to go back to work and quits talking to Joe. Next, Joe tries to jump up the walls to no avail. He's ready to have a nervous breakdown when he hears whistling outside and notices someone putting food and drink through the door hole. Joe rushes to the door and pleads for assistance, saying that he has a pregnant wife to care for, but the guy just closes the slot and injures Joe's hand. As night strikes, Joe chooses to use his tie to bandage his hand and eat the meal they provided him. Suddenly, a light emerges on the wall, and an AI voice welcomes Joe to advanced career training, but the AI doesn't answer any questions, and the logo on the wall fades away, leaving only a few numbers. Joe worries whether something is broken, but the neighbor guy assures him that it isn't. The machine is operational, but not for the benefit of the employees, and the numbers indicate a countdown to midnight, but he refuses to reveal what will happen. Joe asks for more information, but everyone else starts shouting at him because they want to sleep. The neighbor reveals that the voices are all the employees that ended up down here after upsetting the firm, and Joe is surprised to learn that this is part of Mallard, the company he worked for. Joe then falls asleep, but he awakens around midnight when he hears strange noises. It turns out that an employee is being hauled away to be fired, and judging on his screams, it's a brutal procedure. Joe tries to cover his ears as the AI voice informs him that this is part of a peaceful road to well-being. The guard returns the next morning with additional food and informs Joe that the cells must be maintained pristine or the staff will be punished. There's a toilet hole in the corner, and all rubbish must be disposed of there. In fact, Joe's neighbor advises him to do so in order to prevent difficulties. Joe tosses the empty food packing down the stinking toilet hole and then discovers something in the ground. After brushing off the dirt, he's disturbed to discover a skull, and the neighbor confirms employees have died here before. Joe is skeptical since no strong corporation can cover so many fatalities, but the neighbor explains that this was included in the fine print of the contracts they signed, but no one reads, thus the company has their permission. Suddenly, the AI begins responding to Joe, who rants at it and points out that he's worked for this firm for 10 years and deserves better. His diatribe lasts so long that they set off an alert to get him to stop, and the AI announces that his advanced career training session begins today. It says that Joe's productivity has dropped in recent months, and he has utilized too much of his personal time, causing this department's performance to suffer. Joe's new work is expected to help him reestablish himself as a decent employee. Joe's workweek begins at 6 a.m. and concludes at 10 p.m. The rest of the time is his to do as he pleases. His job entails pushing the mill and earning a point for each full rotation. He is expected to reach a daily quota of 50, and if he fails, he will be penalized. Even if they reach the quota, the employee with the fewest points will be sacked at the conclusion of each day. Joe becomes frantic and apologizes for his ranting as he requests to go home to check on his pregnant wife, but his neighbor tells him it's futile to attempt. The company just doesn't care, and nobody leaves this place until their time comes. He advises Joe to work and concentrate on surviving. Joe then begins working at the mill. It's really difficult at first since the machinery is ancient and rusted, and it takes Joe a lot of muscle to complete the first revolution. When he does, the AI congratulates him and plays a celebratory advertisement. Then Joe spends the entire day moving the mill in the hot heat, consuming just a minimal quantity of food they feed him. While Joe is working, the AI continues to play ad after ad. When Joe goes to bed, he can hear today's employee getting fired, and the AI tries to make up for it by reciting more advertisements. The next morning, Joe has breakfast while conversing with his neighbor, and he asks what the point of a quota is if someone is fired regardless, which is the same as being punished for not doing it. The neighbor argues that good enough isn't good enough for Mallard, and when he hears Joe had a quota of 100 yesterday, he warns him not to tell anybody else about it because they'll attempt to pass him. Joe's neighbor urges him to work hard in order to live, but not too hard, since else people will demand it all the time. When Joe begins working on today's quota, he recalls his wife Kate and the day he purchased a home for their new life. Kate was hesitant since it was a large and costly place provided by the corporation, but Joe assured her that it was what he had worked so hard for. The next day, she had a baby-related appointment and reminded Joe that he needed to take the time off, which he did. Kate was not pleased with his work-first approach, pointing out that it would only grow more difficult after the kid arrived. Kate's chat had been cut short when she felt something was amiss. Returning to the present, Joe completes his workday with a quota of 150, only to hear the guard knock on the door. Joe is first terrified, but the guard orders him to strip naked before unlocking the door. Then Joe enters the passageway, where he is soaked with water and only allowed to use the soap for a few seconds before being returned. Joe continues to work hard on the mill, which is tiresome and demanding under the hot heat. Sometimes he talks to his neighbor, who says that the mill doesn't accomplish anything and that people merely work for the pleasure of working. As the heat increases, Joe drinks his water too rapidly and attempts to get more, but the neighbor claims they only provide enough food and water to keep them alive. If Joe wants to drink something, he must first pee in the bottles and hide them behind the pillar, after which he can filter the urine through the insoles of his shoes. Joe is appalled by the concept and refuses to undertake it, even when the neighbor tells out that Mallard is just interested in how far they can go before breaking. Joe returns to work, still thinking about Kate. He recalls the day she expressed concern over the hospital costs and he pledged to work more. When Kate said he couldn't do this alone, Joe tried to stop her from going back to work because after the issues last time she was in danger of losing the baby. Kate, on the other hand, pointed out that if she didn't work, they'd lose the house. Mallard had promised Joe a promotion for years and never delivered, so Kate believed it was foolish to continue believing them. Joe collapses from tiredness at the conclusion of the workday, and the AI congratulates him for meeting the outstanding quota of 370. While gathering his breath, Joe finds that a prior worker engraved the word Alex on the mill's handle. He questions the neighbor about it and discovers that Alex is the only one who managed to escape. Joe receives a pen with his name on it the next day as a special reward for exceeding his quota. Joe scolds them since he has no use for a pan, only to discover that they've increased his daily quota to 370 as the new standard. Joe, enraged, reveals his injured hands and attempts to explain that he won't do it again, but the AI merely replies humans need a little push to evolve, so Joe throws the pen against the wall while disparaging the corporation. After that, he starts working and discovers that they don't give him a point when he completes a revolution, but there's an X on the clock. The X indicates that Joe has a penalty, and it will now take him 2 revolutions to get 1 point. If he receives another X in the future, he will need 4 rotations, then 8, and so on. Joe has no option but to work extra hard since he needs to perform 740 revolutions to meet the quota. However, he soon exhausts himself and gives up. When the neighbor checks on him and discovers he has to do 740, he begins raving at Joe, threatening to murder them all. When the AI declares that the workday is done and that Joe did not fulfill his daily quota, Joe seizes the opportunity to inquire about the penalty. However, the AI claims that Joe imposed the penalty on himself for failing to motivate his co-workers. When Kate's profile shows on the wall and the AI threatens to take her to labor here as well, Joe begs forgiveness and swears to meet his new quota the next day. The AI accepts his promise and adds that if he succeeds tomorrow, he will be free of the penalty. The voice also provides a gesture of thanks by adding an extra challenge. A giant red light emerges on the ceiling. Joe can't sleep that night because of the screaming at 12 o'clock and the red light. The next day, he covers the mill's handle with his jacket so his hands don't suffer as much while working extra hard under the red light. It's a horrible, infuriating process that makes Joe think he's going insane. At some point, he begins to witness a hallucination of himself, who mocks Joe for continuing to believe that hard effort will get him anywhere. When the hallucination starts talking about Kate and the baby, Joe is motivated to keep working and completes the quota just 1 second before time runs out. The AI declares that he has erased the punishment, and the red light goes off. Joe wakes up the next morning to find the AI has sent him a new gesture of appreciation, a little video of Kate in the hospital with the baby. Joe sobs as he realizes he's been in here for far too long and has missed so many critical moments as a father. Joe later asks his neighbor for details on how Alex escaped, since he wants to attempt as well. The neighbor first refuses to speak, but when he hears Joe say he won't be able to see his baby, he feels awful because he at least got to spend some time with his children before being hauled here. The neighbor does not want Joe to have a child who despises him for prioritizing work over family, so he instructs him to check the blind spot on the wall behind the pillar. Joe hurries to the wall and examines it closely, noticing that a circular section had been filled later, implying that someone cut a hole here at some time. Then he takes out the pen and starts digging in the wall, discovering that the corporation is so cheap that they didn't even fix the hole correctly. Many days pass and Joe is exhausted, but he never gives up. He makes his daily quota on the mill during work hours and then spends his so-called free time digging the hole. When the hole is large enough, Joe gets into it and begins crawling out. After a few minutes, he emerges into a very dark area and attempts to find his way around, only to be discovered by the guard. Joe is knocked unconscious, and when he awakens, he is back in the chamber with the mill, and the hole has been filled once more. At that point, the AI begins lecturing him and begins the punishment. They raise the quota to 1,000, and the neighbor's leg is broken by the guard. Joe tries to apologize, but the guy continues to scream about how he can't work right now and how they don't have control here. It's just algorithms running the entire business. The neighbor feels horrible because he built the system while working in IT and claims that people cannot reason with AI, but this offers Joe an idea. If the computer follows the rules, if no one works, everyone ends the day with no points, and a tie means no one dies. The neighbor believes it is risky, but Joe tells her that they have nothing to lose. He leaps to the top of the mill and delivers a speech on how hard labor will not get them anywhere in this firm, and that if they do not work, they will not die. Soon, all of the other employees are chanting along, and when the workday begins, no one works. Joe is overjoyed because he believes he has won, but as the day draws to a close, the AI declares that anybody with 0 points will be killed. This frightens the other employees, and they return to work right once, despite Joe's pleas not to let them win. Suddenly, the neighbor informs Joe that his child is fortunate to have such a wonderful father, but if he wants to meet the child, he must do whatever it takes to get out. Joe, with no other option, restarts the mill. Later that night, the neighbor realizes he'll die soon and confesses his name is Alex, and he was the one who managed to escape. But, like Joe, he was apprehended and deported. He didn't inform Joe because he wanted to believe there was still hope for the second attempt. Alex's sole regret is that he didn't burn this building down. Joe says goodbye to him, then he cries as he hears the guard take Alex away for termination. The next morning, the AI delivers Joe another encouraging gift, a brief video of Kate and the infant, who can now walk. Joe is bothered by the fact that he has been here for months and begins ranting at the firm, abusing it with harsh words for taking everything from him. The AI doesn't like Joe's attitude and determines he should be fired. Then the door opens and a swarm of people enter, disregarding Joe's queries and pleas. Soon after, the guard enters and prepares the injection while contemplating if Joe's death will release his house and wife, prompting an enraged Joe to leap on him and begin beating him up. As blood splatters all over the standing individuals, the AI declares that the guard failed and that the punishment is termination, and as Joe is now doing that duty, he will be promoted to level 9. Joe realizes what he's doing and swiftly backs up, refusing the guard's demands to complete it. Disturbed, Joe declares that he is not a monster and will not allow the firm to create one for him, so he leaves. He blinks and is startled to find himself back in his normal workplace, with a machine attached to his head, surrounded by employees in the same predicament. This turned out to be the company's advanced career training simulation. A coworker who resembles the guard reveals that Joe volunteered for the program and that, while it felt longer, he was only there for 60 minutes, implying that Joe's son hasn't yet been born. Joe had been trapped at level 8, with no chance of advancement, but it turned out that it wasn't because he wasn't skilled enough, but because he wasn't being challenged to perform better. His productivity increased and his leadership was exceptional during the experiment, therefore he is now finally being promoted to level 9. Joe is escorted to his new workplace after unplugging the machine, where he is greeted by a friendlier AI. Joe can't stop experiencing visions of what happened to him, which caused him to develop PTSD, even though it was simply a simulation. The workspace is modest and straightforward, almost claustrophobic. Because the project is classified, Joe's coworker hands him a non-disclosure agreement, which he signs for the sake of his wife. Joe phones Kate to check on her after the person has left, weeping when he finally hears her voice. When the call is finished, he declares that he will burn this firm down.